Hey there guys, TC Made with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you another unofficial Ascent Combat Framework guide. This will address version 3, which recently came out in a stable format. So, of course, you know, if you're already in the Discord for Ascent Combat Framework and you've been authorized, you'll have access to the sample project that we'll be going through here. Of course, you'll need 5.1 installed. You'll have ACF sample version 3. And eventually, if you're using the ultimate version, you'll have to have the Ascent Combat toolset also. So when we open up the project, what I want to do is give you a little overview of some things that might be a little bit different than what we saw in previous versions. Let's start with the editor preferences and the project settings. If you go into project settings, we still have gameplay tags here. These are the same pretty much as what they were before. There's a little bit of a category remapping that I don't recall seeing before. So RPG.attributes been remapped to RPG.primary attributes is this new category in here now. Under RPG, we have attributes and primary attributes and then statistics. So that's a little different, which doesn't affect much. It's just if you're looking for things, they might be in slightly different places. Also inside of here in your framework, you have additional things underneath of the project settings there, where we go down a little bit further under Ascent Action System Settings. This is a new breakout of the previous system. So in here it defines the moveset action root tags and the default action states, which in this case the default root tag for moveset is moveset and the default for actions is actions. These could be changed, of course, for your preferences. Ascent character controller settings are in a different spot here now. These are a little new. And again, these just give you the base tags. So what you can see here is that basically this has been more compartmentalized or more modular in a sense that each of these things are now under their own little category headings instead of being all clustered together. Makes it a little bit cleaner to go through. Under Ascent Combat settings, we also have defaults in here for hit state, death state, and health tags, which you can update. And then also for your Ascent inventory settings, it defines the base items, the item slot, and the world item class. So again, if you're looking for these things, they may have moved around. You'll find them in here. Ascent Load and Save also has some new spots in here, and the same thing with the Ascent RPG system. The RPG system is, in my opinion, substantially different because here you now have the definitions of your root tags for the primary and statistics and attributes, but also you now have a data asset that defines the attribute generation configuration, and under here he's got a basic ARS generation rules sample. And the difference with a data asset basically is you can take a data asset and it's a container that has predefined values in it that you can assign to your character or to your modules or whatever it is that you're using, and then look up values from that at runtime. And the benefit, of course, if you change something in the data asset, it applies all the way down through the project to anything that's using that data asset. So it's a real easy way to make global changes and bulk updates to things instead of having to go into every module and changing something that's in a default, you know. So this is really an improvement, in my opinion, to go to a data asset here. But if we open this up, what we see is in the old versions, these would tell you how you had the influences of each different system. That's all in here now. So if you go under this data asset, double click it to open up, and just pull it up here to the top. I'll roll it back up. So you would see it here as attributes generation rules, and there's 5 array elements in here. And the array elements, if we collapse these out, are the attributes for strength, constitution, endurance, dexterity, and intelligence. So all those settings are now inside of this data asset. And if you expand these out, what it's showing you is that you have a tag called primary attribute.strength, and that has an influence parameter over here on a curve which represents strength to damage. And what these curves tell you is that if, as you look across them, the more strength you have, the more damage you will do. So this is very similar to what you would have in a data table. So like, you know, from a range of 0 to 10, you might do, 20 damage. And from a range of 11 to 30 or whatever, you might do, 30 or 40 damage. So if you look at these curves, they're basically representing the same values you would normally have inside of a table. At the intersection of these values, you find if you have a strength of 0, your damage would also be down here as just a base damage of 0. But as you go up this curve and you get all the way up to 20, if you had a strength of 20, your damage would end up being 99 or 100, see on that curve right there where these plot points meet. So that's all you're doing, is you're defining over time how that affects or changes your damage. And you do these with other things as well. But I'm just showing you this is where they've changed. If you want to go look at the curves, you can actually just hit the button here to go and pull the curve up and make changes directly in there. Also, you have one in here for Constitution. Constitution influences your hit points. So the higher your Constitution value on your character is, the more hit points you will gain. Same thing down here, you have one for Endurance, and Endurance has an influence statistic in here for stamina regeneration and also for max stamina. So again, this is all just moved under a different data asset, which is now read from the settings out there on the front. And you can go through these yourself, obviously, and figure this out. I'm just giving you a high-level overview of where things have moved to. So moving into the character, some things that are different about the character now. We have a couple of different things that have happened now. There's an ACF actions component, which I think was there before, but now it's actually being utilized to pull in these things called action sets. Action sets used to be defined in the animation blueprint, and there was a trigger action command, and you would define in the animation blueprint what the montage would be, and any crossover effects as far as, you know, absorbing stamina or mana or whatever it was that action cost. So now that's under this ACF actions component directly on your character. And again, you go over here under ACF, under the ACF section for that component, and you'll see these moveset actions that you can expand out. One is for the moveset for single hand sword, right? And this action set, if you just, again, use the browser, it'll take you out to these action sets, which are now under these blueprints. And then you can look at how these are laid out. So, for example, a regular action attack, there's only 3 things defined in here. So if you just look at a regular attack, for example, the ACF action attack will play whatever animation is tied to this montage. Now, in this case here, he has multiple combos that if you single click, double click, continue to double click, you know, or use modifiers or whatever, that it'll go into these different sections of the combo. And this section in here is what's notifying ACF to be able to do damage traces, and then to tell it that action has exited and you can go on to the next action. Now, this is very similar to what we had before. There's a lot more settings, I think, over here than what we had previously, but that's a 5.1 thing. ACF itself over here, this configuration is very similar to how it used to be on the montage. It's just now embedded in this actions manager. And if you look down here a little bit further, what it actually tells you is what that action cost is. So the stamina gets affected by 32 every time you swing the sword or whatever you're using for your actions.attack in this sword's actions. So if you want to change the amount of stamina or whatever that's affected here, you would do it right there. And same thing if you want to do a jump attack, it's telling you that the jump attack would have this montage action, and then what's going to happen is whenever you do that, you're going to have an action config here, and you know, if this would take off anything, here's your warp conditions. And there should have been, I guess there's no, I don't see any action cost in here where it's actually costing you stamina for that. But a good example that I actually was looking at in the thing is that, you know, I was like back in the old days, I think sprint was maybe not necessarily under the actions, but I think it's under movement. So when I went and looked at mine, if you look at the character movement component in here, same thing, you have these different movement states now. And well, they were probably here before, but in the movement state, you also have where you can affect modifiers. So in here is your state action for sprinting, which takes your max state speed up to 800. But I'll show you in here, the original value in here, this wasn't set up to influence anything, so there was no mod here, right? In your current sample, you probably won't see a mod. So if I run out here and I use my shift key to sprint, you see on the left-hand side there, that little green bar, that's my stamina. And my stamina doesn't go down, so you know, I could theoretically sprint indefinitely the way that this is set up currently. So if I wanted to actually modify that so that I did lose stamina over time for running, what I would do is I would go into the ACF full player and go into the character movement component, and down here under sprint, I could say, well, I want to affect a statistic. So I'd hit the plus button there, and I would come down in and say the statistic that I want to affect is under RPG, under statistics for stamina, and then I want my stamina value. What you can put in here is on the regen. If you use a negative value, I can say I want my regen to be -30, let's say, while I'm sprinting. So by making that little change there, now when I run and I hold down my shift key, what you should see is that I'm burning off 30 stamina at each click or interval or whatever until I get all the way down to 0, and then it'll break off and I'll start just jogging again as my stamina regen goes back up. And then again, if I hit the shift key, it'll start to go back down. So that's just a quick way to modify the behaviors of something in ACF. Everything's pretty much pre-configured, and all you're doing, or not pre-configured, but pre-designed, I should say, that you can go in and you can make changes to these different components to influence the behavior of your character. So check out the actions component, check out the character movement, because a couple things here have moved around. And just, with any of these, if you click on them, it's going to give you the things that you need under. Like here's Ascent Collision Manager, right? So this defines how your traces and info all come out for different weapons. If you have that on a Collision Manager, if you're, you put it on your sword, or you put it on a enemy that has traces that they would turn on to do damage, like the spider would be a good example in here. And also, if you look down here at the mesh, we now have our animation blueprint. Over here is ACF Humanoid ABP. Been quite a few changes to this, and the biggest change is that, again, they've broken this out so that all the different movement stuff is in the primary blueprint. If you go in here, you see there's no animation graph within this primary ACF humanoid animation blueprint. What we have instead now is, if we go in here and we look at I think it's under class settings. Or is it under, it's under class defaults maybe? Under ACF here. Yeah, so class defaults ACF. You have your configs for different things, like if you want your movement threshold to change here, like what level of movement is considered moving, So if I go from 0 to 0.02, I'm in motion. And that'll trigger other effects in your animation blueprint. That's all standard type stuff, but the values are here. In your different move sets that this character has access to through this animation blueprint, we now have moveset layers and overlay layers, and then layers when you're riding. So a moveset layer, you can think of these as, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, somebody could correct me, but in my opinion, the moveset layers basically represent the lower part of the body's animation, like how you would run if you were holding a pistol versus how you might run if you were carrying a rocket launcher. And you see here we have a base moveset, a moveset rifle, and a moveset pistol. And these get triggered from the item. So on the item, if I pick up a thing that has a moveset on it for the rifle, if it's a rifle weapon, it's going to put me into the moveset for rifle. Well, in this case, there's also an overlay. And you see there's an overlay here for the moveset rifle. So what you can do, if you want to go and check these out, you can go to the moveset for the rifle and go over here and pop this open. And this is going to be the animation blueprint for the rifle for the anim layers. And again, I think what you'll see is, if you look under these class defaults, what you're specifying in here is all the different cardinals of how you walk forward, backward, left, and right, which would normally have been inside of a like a animation I forget what they call them, blend spaces or whatever. So basically, a lot of this stuff is getting identified in here and being passed off as variables to other things that are reading these. And you can just define them right here very easily for your walk cardinals, your cardinals, and your crouch cardinals, and jogging. All the different animations that we use are now in these different anim layers. And then the overlay states would actually show you, like if you are, let's go back here. We'll go back into the ACF anim humanoid, and we'll look at the overlay for the rifle. And what you can see in the rifle overlay is that these actually have more of your overlay states for how the idle or the aim or the block would be on top of that other animation. So the overlay anim here for idle with a rifle has this animation to it, right? The base layer is still the same. The base pose would be driven by, the other animation blueprint that we talked about. And these two things just get stacked on top of each other to make your animations come together very similar to how you would use in a blend by bowl, or blend layers by bone or whatever. There's different ways to drive these types of animations, but the big takeaway here is that if you go into what you used to find for all these definitions of the character, they've again been switched around so that the actions are in the animation or in the character blueprint. The base moveset layers are in the action or animation blueprint, and then the definitions of the overlays lead you to other sub blueprints which are stacked on top of those primary blueprints. And so that's just kind of how you want to look at this. And then it also shows you in here the movesets. So in the moveset, for example, for the unarmed moveset, if you go and find the moveset, again, there's your unarmed moveset character animation. So you can go and fix all these. I'll talk about how to bring a new character onto this example in a different video. I just want to dedicate a video specifically to that. This is supposed to be kind of like a highlight reel overview of what's changed and where things are. The basics of it, though, is going to be that since you're in 5.1, you should be able to use either compatible skeletons and past animation data from that, or to be able to use a retarget rig from the IK managers that they've incorporated into version 5 and forward. And we'll go through that. But basically, I wanted to give you this highlight reel. Again, if you're in the support group, you can open this up. You'll be able to go in there and check out all the stuff under the configurations, under the project settings. You'll be able to go in here and look at all the different data containers and assets that have changed now. And ACF still uses this inheritance model, and in this example, that's basically what Pask is showing you, is that if you look at the ACF full player BP, the upstream parent of this is the ACF base player BP. And if I open that up, the upstream parent of that is the ACF player character BP. And, you can keep drilling up through this to get to the root of all this. Now, if you wanted to make changes to things that are in here, other variables and things like that are, important to your character, what I would recommend is I would make an ACF character child, right? And then the first child, I would add all of my new variables and anything, like functions or calls or whatever that I wanted to have as a global for any character in my game. And that's what Pask is doing here. You take an ACF character, and then they become a player character or a base player, or a one of them has a shooting component on it as a child of another character, or one of them can ride a horse. And so all the different stuff for that is through this hierarchical drilling down, or drilling up rather, through the hierarchy of this. And there's documentation that explains this whole process of how it's set up, but I'm just again giving you the highlight reel. The other thing that I'll talk about in a different video is this motion warp component that Pask has in here. Ever since I think it started with 5.0, they brought in this idea of animation warping, which he has an example in this already. That if your character, let me close these, if your character is running or moving forward, sprinting or whatever, so you get basically your W and your shift key down, so you're running forward. If you have your sword out, which I just hit the 1 key to do that, if I'm running forward and I have the shift down and I hit my attack button, I now do this jump animation. And I believe that if you have a target on an enemy when you do this, it'll try and warp to that target. Again, that might not be exactly how that's set up, but the intent of it is that you'll now be able to get a warp target and apply animation warping, which is a whole topic in itself, to anything that's in ACF, because it uses this compatible version with 5.1 to make all that happen. So most of the stuff in the sample is pretty similar. Pask has added in, a car as an example. The horse riding is a little bit better in my opinion. You can now just use the W key. I think you tap it a couple times to get into higher speed running. He has an example over here of a crafting sample. You have another enemies and groups test over here. You can actually summon your own companion by hitting either the 7 key or the 6 key. You can also cast some spells. I think there's a fireball spell in there and maybe a bless spell. These are all defined in the keys and also in the actions components and everything. And again, they tell you how all that stuff works. So if I went to ACF full player, ACF actions component, and I look down here, I have this player action set. I go out to my player action set, and it says as a player, here's all the different actions you can perform. So I'll just roll these back up. I can dodge, I can use items, I can equip ranged weapons, I can get hit, I can die, I can shoot and taunt, cast fireball, bless spells, summons, I can block, so all that stuff's defined here. And again, like, so for fireball, you come over here, fireball's going to cast this montage, and at the same time, that action is going to use the ACF spell projectile action. And if you don't know what these are, when you create these montage actions, you have blueprints that you can assign to them that are the default handlers of what should happen whenever these notifications get hit. So these, in this case, most of these are just telling ACF that you've actually attacked at that moment or that attack is over. But if you wanted to have custom handlers in here for things like jumping attacks where you need to shut off physics temporarily or switch into flying mode, which is typical when you're in a multiplayer game. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but in a multiplayer game, your physics doesn't really work the same way. So if you have an animation where root motion is causing your character to jump in the air, you actually have to disable, you have to flip over into flying mode so that your character can actually play that animation. And so you would put markers in your montage that say, here's where I want to start flying mode and here's where I want to end that. And then in these associated blueprints, you could go in and fix those actions, right? So just, I'll talk about all this stuff in other videos, or I have talked about it in other videos that were for version 2.0. I would say probably 80 to 90% of my 2.0 and even my version 1.0 videos still apply to most of ACF. You'll just find the things in different spots, From what I'm seeing so far, I don't see anything that's substantially changed in the regards. It's just been made way more organized and way more stable and takes advantage of a lot of the new technology that's been offered by version 5.0. So I don't want to run this on too long. Just want to give you kind of a primer into what we're going to be talking about in the upcoming videos. I want to get this out to the community. I know a lot of people are probably excited to dig into this pretty deep, and I'll try and do as many videos as I can. I know Pasca's going to be doing official tutorials also, so please regard this as unofficial and just something to help you get up and running, heading into Pasca's tutorials, which will be coming soon, hopefully. All right, guys, thanks again. My name's TC Made with TC Gaming, and if you want to catch me on my Discord or just leave me a message on YouTube, that's great, and I'll try and get back to you if I can. If you have specific ACF questions, though, my recommendation is to use the support group in ACF under the ACF support section and ask your question there to the community, because there's a ton of people who are very, very helpful, super knowledgeable, give you very in-depth answers. And then the other thing is the benefit for everybody else is they get to see that answer also. When you're having trouble and you solve something, you might be answering somebody else's question that it would take them a long time to figure out how to get that themselves. So please use the community for that type of stuff. If you have specific questions about something that I did or whatever, feel free to drop me a line. Otherwise, you guys take care. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in another video sometime soon. Take care.